the central issue here is actually about capacity and capacity to strike good deals. A critical example is the Just Energy Transition Partnership that was struck in Glasgow last year. After Glasgow, many African countries came to me and said, Chucks, why is it that South Africa was able to get this deal and we were not able to do so? Well, one of the main reasons is that South Africa has relatively greater capacity to negotiate the finance, the infrastructure, and the other aspects of the deal that made the Just Transition Partnership Agreement plausible. In many cases, we, and by that I mean poor countries, don't have the capacity to strike good contracts and good deals. And this has manifested in many different examples and issue areas. Just last week, it emerged that Nigeria may be owing about 7.58 trillion naira, or about $12 billion in damages that it will have to pay to foreign investors because of default of contract. But when you read under in between the lines, you'll find that there are some commentators that are actually saying that those contracts were actually unfair to Nigeria in the first place. And indeed, that if Nigerian negotiators actually knew what they were doing, these foreign companies may actually be owing Nigeria a lot of money. In some case, they mentioned 23 billion. Now, just 3 days ago, Nigerian press, it broke in the Nigerian press that Nigeria has settled out of the court, paying another foreign company that is into iron ore, steel, and railway, 496 million in damages because of contract failure. Indeed, this company had claimed $14 billion, but then Nigeria settled out of court. Take another example of the Malabu oil. 1998 started and Nigeria ended up settling the NNPC, Shell, Total, Ajib, Eni, and it cost Nigeria about $2 billion. And so you see that there are practical examples of how Nigeria and many other countries in Africa are already paying through their nose for the lack of ability to negotiate good deals. Now we see a lot of rush for gas in Africa and hydrogen and a number of other minerals that are critical, as you said in your introduction, as vital for enabling this transition. Whether Africa profits from these deals will depend more or less on their ability to negotiate sound contracts. We see that the transition is already underway. There are several discussions and dialogues, but they are not working for poor countries, for Africa, for Nigeria in particular, or for a large part because of poor contracts and inability to negotiate well. And so one of the things that have to happen is that Europe and the rest of the world need to back Connex and other agencies that are actually thinking deep about these things. Because otherwise we'll just stay at the superfluity and the superficial level. It is when Africa is empowered to negotiate and drive good deals that we can stand the chance of enjoying this transition and enjoying a just transition.
We can't really expect large-scale operations to wind down or development to be put on hold in most contexts involving real societies, real governments, real jobs, real tax dollars, unless there's a deal of some kind there. And a deal, moreover, which is ballpark competitive with a decision to go ahead or to continue producing fossil fuels. It would seem to us at this stage that there's two components. One is how do you produce a fair valuation for something stopping happening or not happening? And without getting too much into the technical weeds, we think it is possible to do that. When I and colleagues, when we assist governments in negotiating deals, we build financial models which show their future revenue flows under a number of different conditions, and then sometimes you're collapsing that into what's called a net present value, so how much the asset is worth if you bought or sold it today, and so on. Those techniques exist and are deployed, and a large part, of course, of Connex's work is to marry that kind of expertise to government deal making. So you could, for example, and we're only at the illustrative stage now, take an intended oil field and say, well, what are the future revenues to the government going to be if the deal goes ahead? And then use that as the start of a basis of negotiation for it not going ahead.
It is quite clear that a range of expertise would be needed. The story I told you about how Nigeria actually quite recently ended up paying about $400 million to a foreign company. We submitted, or the government, as a result of the furore that arose, certain international experts came in and looked at the contract documents. And what they found was that this company was actually already struggling and could perhaps have defaulted in payment of the first tranche of the money, the first leg for the Ajaokuta steel industry in the next 55 days. So that if the government had not cancelled the contract hurriedly or invoked the clause in Section 12 of the agreement in a clever way, they would have been able to avoid the payment of those damages, as well as potentially claim about $25 million from the company. So obviously, there was a lacking of the legal contract understanding or expertise from the Nigerian perspective. Johnny has also highlighted a very powerful and important capacity gap in the area of financial modeling. Now, many times, African countries, Nigeria inclusive, even in the high up, at the level of the Ministry of Finance, they don't have expert financial modelers to be able to actually indicate clearly what is the kind of range of profit that could accrue from a particular deal. So there's a bit of a mucking about. And so legal expertise, financial modeling expertise, in the case of just transition, even the capacity to do integrated modeling assessment. I am leading a project called the Deep Decarbonization Project, or Pathway for Nigeria. Our president announced a net zero target by 2060 last year at Glasgow. And then we soon realized that the document upon which that announcement was based, which we call the Energy Transition Plan, doesn't actually accommodate vital aspects of the economy, such as agriculture, forestry, and land use, and is actually quite narrowly focused on gas and some other energy sources. We also still don't have access to the data that produced the net zero plan upon which our announcement was based. Would you not consider that very ludicrous and almost laughable? And so we have started now, through my leadership, to generate our own indigenous models and numbers that will actually question and interrogate the net zero plan. So there are a range of different expertise that are necessary.